Thank you so much. I can't believe after the number of times I thought that I had to remind myself to do this and I forgot. So thank you. That's why we don't do these things on our own. We always have colleagues to keep us focused. So if you wish to ask a question, you can do it either by raising your virtual hand, or you can post a question in the chat. There's a question in the chat about will closed captioning be enabled? I don't know how to do that. Michelle or Leticia, do you?
That's the first.
No,
I've heard.
I don't believe we're actually have been asked that in the past, and it's something that we want to explore. But as of now, we don't have the capability. We may be able to, because it is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded to YouTube for the municipality. Perhaps through a YouTube function, we might be able to do some subtitle, the subtitle type.
Yeah, we should look into that for the future. Thank you for that suggestion, and sorry not to be able to deliver for today. So anyway, so you can raise your virtual hand or you can put a question in the chat. Leticia is going to make sure we have a copy of the chat for after, and we'll be keeping track of the questions and comments so that even if we don't answer things tonight, it'll be on our agenda to address in the future. Since we do have a pretty good number of respondents here, please try to keep your comments to about 3 minutes. Again, there'll be other opportunities to reach out through public meetings or through the task force meetings. I just want to start by giving a brief update on the state legislation. So as you may recall, back in November, New Jersey voted pretty overwhelmingly to legalize cannabis. It was more than 70%, and Princeton voters were higher than that number. Governor Murphy signed legislation in February, and the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, which is supposed to enact all the rules that will allow legal cannabis in the state, had its first meeting on April 12th. And the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, or CRC, will issue its rules in August. So one thing to note about legal cannabis in New Jersey is that delivery is going to be allowed everywhere in the state with no restrictions. Municipalities cannot restrict or regulate that in any way. So I think that's something that we have to keep in mind as we continue with our conversation about this. So according to the way the law was passed in the state, municipalities are automatically opted in the relevant zones, that is either commercial or industrial for cannabis. So we, by August 21st, we either have to opt out completely or opt out for some or more of the different cannabis licenses that are available. And those are cultivation, manufacturing, wholesaling, distribution, retail, and delivery. If we do not opt out, if we opt in, we cannot restrict in any way that decision for 5 years. If we opt out, the leading consensus, although this has not been tested in court, is that we can choose to opt in at any time. This is what our attorney and what the League of Municipalities attorney is saying, but they both add the caveat that without a court case to affirm that, they think that that's the case. So due to the process of passing an ordinance and the fact that since this will involve land use and the ordinance has to go before the planning board, we have a deadline of our council meeting of July 12th to pass our ordinance. So we're aiming towards that. And that's why if some of you feel like this has just suddenly appeared on your radar out of nowhere, it really is not our decision. It's a decision of the state and the way the legislation was written. And that deadline has meant that we've had a very narrow focus recently on the task force about simply addressing the issue of whether we should choose to opt in. Um, there are many important issues that still need to be addressed that are not affected by this impending deadline. I don't want in any way for anyone to think that those issues are not important, but they just don't have to be addressed according to state law in the very near future. So we wanted to hold this public meeting because we realized that this is a very significant issue, and we wanted to gather as much input from the public as possible as we go forward and the task force works to make its best recommendation. So the Cannabis Task Force includes members representing important institutions in town, such as the Princeton Civil Rights Commission, Princeton Public Schools, Princeton University, Not in Our Town, Students for Sensible Drug Policies, Corner House, Princeton Senior Resource Center, Princeton Police Department, Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, and the Princeton Health Department. On top of that, we have citizen representatives and representatives from the business community. We wanted to make sure that all important voices were represented. I just want to read you a couple of sentences from the CTF's mission statement. The Cannabis Task Force serves in an advisory capacity to provide input to mayor and council on the major areas of concern regarding legal cannabis. Issues to be considered include cannabis operations in the municipality, education, and enforcement. The CTF's discussions and recommendations will keep social and racial justice in the forefront. And the CTF had its first meeting in April, so we're just about 2 months in. And I'm now going to turn this over to Council President Leticia Fraga to talk about what we are not going to be discussing tonight.
Yes. Thank you, Eve. That was a great intro. So what we're want to refer to as what we're not going to be addressing yet, but will be addressed later because we recognize is very important to us, is the issue of social and racial equity. Earlier this year, when Mayor and Council adopted the resolution establishing a cannabis task force, we then reinforced our commitment to social and restorative justice in terms of cannabis policing and enforcement. We, Mayor and Council at the time, recognized that the burden of the criminalization of cannabis has fallen heavily on community of color and the poor. And as the task force deliberates and develops recommendations as to whether or to what extent cannabis or medical cannabis should be permitted or otherwise regulated in Princeton, we will ensure that social justice and racial justice considerations are highly valued in all of our decision making. And to help us with that, we will make use of racial equity impact assessment toolkit that was developed last year by Princeton Civil Rights Commission. The toolkit is intended to be used in the development of all new and revised municipal policies, programs, initiatives, and such. And Sherrod Smith, who is Vice Chair of the Civil Rights Commission and a member of our Cannabis Task Force, will be able to guide us as in using the toolkit as the task force works to develop policy recommendations. So, and that is to ensure that we are looking at our recommendations through a social and racial equity lens. So I just want to give you an idea of what some of those recommendations could include. That could be licensing requirements. So we could develop a list of what the eligibility requirements would be for businesses. And also from a social and racial equity perspective, legal counsel has advised us that we cannot make certain requirements as to who is eligible to apply. But with the hope that we would have more applicants than dispensaries, we could then consider a ranking system that would help us evaluate the applicants using specific criteria. And that criteria could include, for example, is the business minority and women owned? Can we encourage employees be local? That they be or victims of the war on drugs, that the business consider employing individuals who were formerly incarcerated for cannabis offenses. Also from a racial equity perspective, the task force could recommend how potential tax revenue will be used, where it will be directed. We will also be discussing what enforcement could look like at the local level. As Councilwoman Niedergang mentioned, we do have a representative from the Princeton Police Department serving on the task force that will be able to provide input as we discuss that. We are here tonight because we also want to hear from members of the public. We welcome your input at any time during the process that as we deliberate what we're going to be recommending, and even as it's brought to council for consideration. So please feel free to reach out to Councilwomen Niedergang and Perón-Lambros and myself, and we will then relay your input to other members of the task force. I will now turn this over to my colleague, Councilwoman Michelle Perón-Lambros, who will give a presentation on zoning, planning, and operational considerations.
Thank you. Thank you both. And good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint here. Just give me 1 second. Do I have permission?
Eve, if you're the host, you should be able to.
Yeah,
I got it.
you got it? Okay.
Can you see that? Everyone?
Yes, we can.
Let's make that, let me just play it as a slideshow. No, doesn't want me to go to a slideshow. Hang on. Sharing for 1 second, sorry. Okie dokie. Now. I had that all set up. But... All right. Okay, just 1 second. It lets me go to the slideshow, but then I can't see the screen to get back to the Zoom call. So 1 second. Guess I.
Michelle, if you're in full screen on your view, you might want to change that and then put the PowerPoint at the bottom where you can just click on it once you're ready to share.
Yeah, I've silenced my dog. I think as everyone see the PowerPoint now, I think, all right.
Yes, we can see it.
All right, so I'm going to talk about what the task force considered to be, and we decided to take on, is to talk tonight about retail dispensaries. And I'm going to talk first of all about location and then operational considerations. So first of all, what zones would cannabis dispensaries theoretically be allowed in if we were to opt in? And then how many total cannabis retailers would we allow in town as a total? So as Leticia mentioned before, one of the things that we want to be sure is that there's going to be enough competition that some of that important criteria that we'd like to have, which would be based on minority ownership and local resident preference, we can only do that if there's competition. So, obviously keeping a limit on the amount of dispensaries that would be allowed, and limited zones. So some of the areas that we're looking at for the various dispensaries that could be allowed, but even if we zone that these areas are allowing dispensaries, it doesn't mean that automatically dispensaries would pop up there, because you have space availability, rental prices, the landlord desirability, transportation, parking issues.
Yeah, give me
all
one
of these-
moment.
I'm sorry.
I have 5 minutes.
Can everyone please mute if you're not speaking? Thank you. So all of these would be business owner decisions. So the zoning would just allow for it. So by ordinance also, we can cap, not only can we designate which areas, but then we can cap the total number of dispensaries regardless of which zone it's in. So right now we have 7 potential zones. They're commercial zones currently. I'll explain the names, but CBD being the Central Business District, Jugtown, Witherspoon North, 206 North actually has 2 separate areas, the Princeton Shopping Center and what we call the Dinky area South. So here's the map. And I can't do the interactive thing. Clearly I have problems as it is with PowerPoint. So, but I'm just going to describe these areas. So 206 North would be where Bottle King is, up into 206 until the border to Montgomery. So that area, there's would be could possibly be a zoned area, but there's a lower part of 206 North area, which would be at the corner of Cherry Hill Road and 206 and Mount Lucas, where it intersects at that corner. There's a Northfield Bank. There's a convenience store there. So that area would be another possible area that could be zoned. Then there's the Princeton Shopping Center, which has its own separate owner. That would be a potential zone. Witherspoon Street North would be the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood. There's quite a bit of retail mixed use development on Witherspoon Street. And then there's the Central Business District, which encompasses Nassau Street at Witherspoon Street and Palmer Square. There are various owners of Palmer Square owns its own property there. And then there's various owners throughout the Central Business District. Jugtown is where Trattoria Procaccini and Whole Earth are. So that's another zone. There's a Bank of America there. And then Dinky South, the Dinky area would encompass like McCarter Theater and where the restaurants are, Dinky Bar, but we weren't thinking of that area. We were thinking more along the lines of a cross between Metro North and the upholstery store, Skillman Upholstery. So there's various retail. I think there's an Enterprise location. So there's various retail there. So those were the zones, that were identified through the task force or our last task force meeting. So those are 7 zones. So the things that we're looking at and things that we want to discuss and start getting feedback while we're looking and evaluating whether or not these zones would be zoned for the use would be, first of all, accessibility criteria. So is there access for economically disadvantaged residents? In other words, does it have walkability? Does it have access to public transit? Is there access to technology, Wi-Fi networks? And then parking availability. And then what location restrictions do we want to impose? I mean, we're going to say how many feet. There isn't a state law regarding how far it is from a school or a park or a church. But these criteria we want to have discussions about because we can impose that. Sorry. Someone just came to the door. Sorry. Okay. Another criteria in terms of accessibility is whether or not we would anticipate allowing for queuing on the street, or would all the queuing have to be done within the retail establishment itself? And if so, then are we allowing for enough square footage within the retail establishment? Or are we going to not allow lines, but say this could be avoided by having a beeper system or a paging system, or again, using technology, but maybe creating a situation where there would be technology that would have to be available in case someone doesn't have a cell phone. So those are some of the accessibility criteria. We can go back through this and discuss once we open it up to Q&A. And I'll go to the next slide. And then another visual criteria is what kind of signage are we going to allow? And this could be different in different zones. If it's in a historic zone, it's going to be subject to Historic Preservation Commission approvals, just like any other commercial signage. Words like cannabis and weed and smoke shop they're prohibited by state law. And I have some pictures of what those could possibly look like. This pharma sign here, where my cursor is a dispensary, very discreet. The green solution, a little less discreet, but discreet nonetheless. That type of thing where it's within our codes, within the look of our commercial districts, and certainly not something that's going to draw attention for youth and that type of thing. So other operational criteria is the hours. So, restricting hours may also restrict it may be restrictive for people that work shifts, that may need access on a longer term availability. So the task force was thinking of something like longer hours, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. But again, it may vary by zone. So once the zones are established, then those criteria could also be established. And it'd be very complex. I mean, you can have different criteria in different zones. Something else, to consider as well is, do you have it just open? Again, like I mentioned about queuing, or do you have it by appointment only? Now, appointment only may certainly be more desirable for certain areas which are more densely populated, like the Central Business District, like Witherspoon North, maybe the shopping center as well, where you especially in the Central Business District in Witherspoon North, where you have less parking availability. So, you wouldn't want, and you have narrower streets, so you wouldn't necessarily want the queuing. Although, the converse of that is maybe the queuing or the waiting and having a beeper system would then generate foot traffic for the other retail and restaurants while people are waiting their turn. So those are, again, things, really to discuss in the conversation. And that's it. I have some pictures of, these are some various places. I don't remember which was from where, but I have some pictures of what they look like. I mean, this was pretty elaborate, but really beautiful place. It looks like a bank or hotel. And this looks like a little coffee shop or cafe. And then again, this very discreet, very nondescript, and done tastefully. And obviously, we would want something like that for Princeton. And that's it. This looks like a hotel. This looks like and I'm going to turn it back to my colleague, Eve.
Yo.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Leticia. We're open for questions, comments. Just
Do I have a question?
again, John, can you please mute?
How is still so hot?
You can mute him, Eve.
Yeah, I'm trying to find him.
You got him.
Okay. Too many.
I think if somebody's going to be inappropriate or disruptive, that they can be.
Yeah, I'm just assuming.
All right, we can.
Okay, that was one person. Is there anyone else?
So you need to remove Fernando.
Fernando. Okay. I don't see Fernando.
He's gone.
Oh no.
But Hugh has his hand up.
Okay, got it.
All right, Hugh, let me call on you, and Leticia and Michelle, please help me keep an eye on
I'll keep.
participants.
So,
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
yes.
Yes.
Excellent. I can promise you those things were not from me. So my name is Hugh Giordano, and I am a union representative for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. We are the official labor union that represents cannabis workers from seed to sale, both adult use and medical. And I first off want to say thank you very much for having the leadership and the foresight to even put together a committee. I've been traveling the state, and unfortunately there's not many towns, cities, or boroughs that have the leadership qualities that you all have shown by sitting down and talking about it and having real discussions. So as a labor representative, I really appreciate that, and I thank you. As you know, the UFCW supports the cannabis industry, and I know that we had brought up some topics about social equity, and those are things you're going to be considering for the future. Workers' rights and social equity are the same conversation, and I hope that when considering a merit-based program, such as the city of Bayonne's, that you will consider labor rights as part of that as well, because it is without a doubt part of social equity. If workers' rights and social equity are not in the same conversation, then it's not pure social equity. So I would hope that wages and benefits and all those types of labor standards. Sorry, I got muted there.
I did that. I was trying to mute the person who was interrupting. I'll remove them, but
that's okay. Take your time. Look, this is going to happen, right? I appreciate you doing it. So, take your time.
Yeah, apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah, that was BTAP. I think you got it. Yeah.
Okay. BPO. I'm looking for it. Can't find it.
He's off now.
Okay.
I would certainly ask that please don't let these types of folks discourage you from having these types of public forums, especially online for people that are disabled and sick. I think it's great that you're doing it. So thank you again. So, in saying that, not only the building trades in S21 and the actual adult use bill, that also is going to handle the medical side too with the Cannabis Commission. There is also the retrofit and build out is done by the union building trades. So not only is it seed to sale UFCW, but it's also the build out and retrofit using IBEW carpenters. And both unions, both the building trades and the UFCW have apprenticeship programs. So we can get the young educated folks immediately involved in it, specifically people of color, people that have served time. Both labor unions, both the UFCW and the building trades support. Please support a merit-based program like Bayonne did and put labor standards, and you will have an absolute support from the labor movement here in New Jersey. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hugh, we have been looking at the Bayonne ordinance. That is a good example. Thank you for your input.
Thank you, Hugh. And Lefty, you were next, and then David. And I'll just keep removing people, and I may mute you in an attempt to stop inappropriate comments, and I apologize ahead of time for that.
Good evening, Council. My name is Edward Lefty Grimes. I'm with sativacross.org. We're a 501c3 here in New Jersey, advocating for disabled rights and for cannabis patients' rights. And I've actually been called a Zoom bomber before. And I'm kind of surprised that these Zoom bombers would be on here when you got sick people, people that are sick and dying, that are hurting, and these people have nothing better to do than make it harder for the sick and dying to get their medicine. Because that's what we advocate for, the sick and the dying to get their medicine. And these people that are here disrupting the meeting, absolutely disgusting display of humanity. You got disabled war vets that need this medicine. These people wouldn't even have the right to be on these meetings if it wasn't for disabled war vets. I'll give you a chance to remove them.
Thank you, Lefty.
That's kind of ridiculous. I don't let them discourage you, though. He was right. These meetings are important to the sick and disabled. For years, sick and disabled have been asking for things like online schooling, online church, online council meetings, online work. And finally, disabled people got all those things, but they gave them for healthy people. So for 14 months, healthy people got all these things disabled people have been asking for. And now they're taking them away. And a lot of these towns are taking it away. So I'm glad to see that you guys are offering this because a lot of towns are saying we don't do it anymore. We can't do it anymore. Well, you choose not to do it. You should always try to help the disabled and let them take part. My friend Jeff took part from his deathbed. He advocated for cannabis. So please consider people in wheelchairs when you make any kind of ordinance, and how far someone in a wheelchair should have to roll themselves to get their medicine. It's not easy. They say we have delivery. We don't have delivery. Jake's Law it gave us delivery, but nobody's doing it. And delivery is going to be another charge. We're getting taxed by the state 7%. We're getting taxed by the towns 2%. And then they want to add a delivery charge onto that. We need help. We need all the help we can get. We're hurting people. We're sick and dying. And I'm sure some of these Zoom bombers have relatives and family that are sick and dying. And it maybe wouldn't be so funny if you saw someone in a wheelchair, saw someone with cancer, suffering, and needed medicine and couldn't get it. So I thank the council for this meeting and for offering it online and for considering the putting the last first. And I'll end with this. They went with songs to the battle.
Because really, we did not imagine that this would happen.
Really, it's disgraceful. It's so awful.
All right.
Sorry.
I'm hoping we're okay now, and I have to apologize. I'm not that talented at this, but haven't been a problem. I really apologize. And David, can I turn this back over to you? I'm really sorry. Whatever you were saying, if you don't mind starting from the beginning. David Jenkins.
Oh, hi.
Sorry,
Excuse me. Hi, Eve. Hi,
apologize.
Council.
Yeah,
Hi,
thanks for coming.
folks. Thank you for working through that and shutting it down. And also just to Lefty, who just spoke, totally, I think there's a lot of different groups that folks are supporting and representing here. And for me, as a resident of the town, I totally support folks that use cannabis products to help reduce pain. I had a stepmother who passed away who used those products as she was going through cancer, and that helped her actually quite a bit. But my voice today is really to talk about public safety and the safety of these products as it relates to adolescents and kids in our town, and all the kids that you see every day in town walking through. I think they're impressionable. I think the products, it's a brand new market. It's not yet regulated. The THC levels in these products widely vary, or very widely. The ability to, for 21-year-olds, I think it's good that, less than 21, they're going to be stopped before they can purchase these products. However, I think just increased access in town is a big public health concern. And if you look at the American Medical Association, if you look at something that I posted a link to, the American Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists, there is well documented facts and data showing the damage that it can do, especially to adolescents' brains. And I don't really think an immediate opt-in in town is a great idea until we learn a little bit more, we observe what's happening in the rest of the state, and the state comes up with its own sets of regulations. And that's why I wanted to speak here, having a kid that goes to school in town and walks, all those kinds of things. I'm very, very concerned, and have also had, family members get addicted to marijuana in their teens, and it's not a good scene. It's something we have to be very, very concerned about. And I'm a little concerned, the 3 council members on this, first I want to thank you for welcoming these voices, but I'm a little concerned that was not brought up or put in the presentation at all. So I'll stop now. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I'm just going to address that, it is legal in the state, that, as I said, that decision has been made, and part of the task force will be focusing on education, community outreach and enforcement. And because of the state deadline, the work on that hasn't really started. But that is something we will be focusing on, whether or not people can buy cannabis legally, can buy cannabis here in Princeton. I think the education efforts are crucial, and that's something we'll be turning our attention to a bit later on. So thank you for your comment. If you don't mind lowering your hand, that would be great. And Jamie, please go ahead.
Hello, good evening. My name is Jamie Van Skyver. I'm from Paulsboro, New Jersey. I also am with Sativa Cross. I'm a medical patient in the state, and I have been for several years. I have systemic lupus, which is an immune illness, fibromyalgia, scoliosis. So I have a lot of pain, other symptoms. I used to be on a dozen pharmaceuticals. I was having to go get infusions to suppress my immune system. I was taking anti-malarials to protect my kidneys. I'm pharmaceutical free, and I have been for several years, and I've been managing my illnesses and my chronic pain strictly with cannabis. I don't know if people really understand when we talk about chronic illness and chronic pain, these are conditions that are not going away. We can pretty much expect them to maybe get worse as we deteriorate with the illness. People need access to these things. If they get in the pharmaceutical cycle, I think we all understand that, the body builds tolerances, and in turn, more and more of whatever substance is needed. And it's absolutely ravaging to people's bodies. I was also taking anti-anxiety pills, antidepressants. I'm not taking any of those right now either, and haven't, again, for several years. We have people that are taking antidepressants, specifically SSRIs. And I don't know if anyone understands that sometimes it makes their desire for suicide stronger. They're clear thinking and they're acting out. And just as a statistic, we have 22 veterans a day killing themselves. And so many of them are speaking out about how this has helped them, that they're not on pharmaceuticals, and they're there and alive to speak about it. I hope that you at least allow people in your community that need this medicine, at least medical access. I see that 75.29% of your constituents voted for legalization. They want that in their community. It's a legal substance. They really shouldn't have to travel hour wherever to go get it. Like, the security I know is, sometimes concerning to people. It's very much not the case at all. When you enter a dispensary, I actually show two forms of identification, one of them being my medical cannabis card and another is state DMV ID. And that's just to get into the first waiting area, and then you're checked in again and you're checked again, and your allotments changed as you're checking out with your purchase. It's not a walk in and whatever you want. It's a very controlled environment. I believe Hugh Giordano, if he recommended giving you a tour of a dispensary so that you can see. But 75% of your constituents voted for recreational or adult use. But please, please, if you decide to opt out of that by the deadline of August 21st, please be very careful about the language that you use, not to include medical in that, so that if there is something down the road, an opportunity, that they don't have all of that red tape to cut through. It's not fair. People are dying and suffering and they need access to this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jamie, for sharing. I don't actually see any other hands up or any hands in the chat. Would anyone from the task force like to address any of the comments that have been made so far?
I wonder if we need to go to the chat, questions that may have been asked in the chat.
Sharon, any questions in the chat? Okay.
No, there's nothing that hasn't already been addressed.
Thank you. Colleen, did you want to?
I just wanted to assure people that whatever we might build as a dispensary in town has to be ADA compliant. So the other gentleman who spoke mentioned wheelchair accessible. And so, anything we might consider in town will be fully ADA compliant. That was one thing. And I also wanted to mention, Dr. Jenkins, that, part of our thinking on the task force is that, underage youth in town are purchasing marijuana through illegal venues, and we have no way of controlling the quality or content of that product in the market. And, part of our hope is that some of this illegal marketing of the drug might leave town if we have legal dispensaries. And there's very, very clear access prohibition to the dispensaries. As Jamie had said, you needed your, state photo ID. And so I think it wouldn't be that hard to screen minors from accessing our dispensaries. I think that's it.
Thank you, Colleen. Mr. Parker.
Yeah, I just want to thank you folks. This task force is a great idea. Thank you for bringing this to give the community a chance to weigh in, and hopefully there will be more such dialogues as we get from point A to point B. Relatively speaking, I know most of the battle across the state has lied in the place of regulation, but there's also a lot of conversation and interaction about equity and opportunity, all right? And especially one of those ironic relationships of giving opportunity to communities that during the period of time that marijuana was illegal in this state were the ones that were hardest pursued and hardest hit in terms of ended up in the criminal system, you know. And as a parent myself, I absolutely would be concerned about access and the impact of on young people. But then again, on the other hand, part of the regulatory process, much like alcohol, all right, is going to be controlled by age and the same process that you would if you're going into the dispensary to get this. It ain't like you can go in there and get it without a proper ID and that kind of stuff. All right, but again, the dialogue has to turn to opportunity and the equity aspects of this, the social justice aspect of this matter. And it's not kind of a bleeding heart kind of statement. All right, it's a fact. All right, and that's a big part of the dialogue that happened at a legislative place that brought this to fruition in New Jersey. In terms of those states and communities that have already put this into play, it also not only in that opportunity, it generates wealth and economic development, economic growth. And there are communities in Princeton. I'm glad to see the map. The map actually included areas in the John Witherspoon community where we have, for instance, we have absolutely no Black business. All right, and it's gone from what was a number of Black businesses there, and we only actually have one Latino owned business or run business in the community. So, you know, this is about opportunity. This is about giving back into the community and allowing communities to kind of be a viable contributors in the process of town. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Jenny?
Hi, this is Jenny Ludmer from Princeton, and I just want to thank this committee for everything that they're doing. Currently, amongst teenagers, marijuana is the easiest drug for them to get. So that is why I support the legalization, decriminalization of this drug. That's the most effective way to limit it to any age group. However, I just want to echo the previous gentleman's comments with concern, because parents and adults that will have access really need to understand that just because New Jersey is moving to legalize this does not mean it's safe for adolescents, especially not with the potency of where marijuana is now compared to where it was when they were kids. Things have changed, and addiction is a serious illness that every parent needs to understand can happen to their children. So I'm hoping that the education piece of this, as it gets, I understand it's coming later, but I really hope that that is carefully thought out as to how we ensure the public understands that nuance of legalization is not the same thing as meaning it's safe for everyone. Thank you.
One of our members who's not here tonight, David Nathan, who is with a group that he co-founded called Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, will be the first to echo, I think, what Jenny said, that the data is really good, that this is not a product that should be used by young people. I think what he'd also say is that if you look at an adult, that compared to other products such as alcohol and tobacco, that the health impact is less severe. But absolutely, there has to be a concerted effort. I don't think anybody is going to disagree with that, to keep the product out of the hands of young people. So thank you, Jenny, for your comment. And that's something the Education and Outreach Task Force will be focusing on. Other comments? The floor is wide open.
I just want to chime in and just make sure that, I don't know if we've explained it at the top of the meeting, that there's a larger task force, and then within the task force, we've broken into 2 committees, right? So there's the economic impact subcommittee, and then the outreach and education subcommittee. And again, because we're fast tracking and making this decision, we've been focusing on the one area, but it's not to say the one is more important or more of a priority than the other. Just wanted to make sure everyone knew that.
David has his hand raised again, and before I give him a second opportunity to speak, just want to make sure that no one who hasn't yet spoken wants to get in. Otherwise, David, turn it over to you.
All right, I'll try not to monopolize the mic for more than a minute or two. I also would ask you, if you're looking at where to put these retail locations, make sure there's not a high degree of people walking their dogs. There's some well-publicized incidents of, these products falling on the ground. Sometimes dogs will eat them, sometimes small kids, and it's incredibly dangerous. It could either kill the dog or it could make them very sick. I would also ask you to look at the impact on bicycle safety. And, there's some well-documented facts regarding Colorado's increase in traffic accidents following legalization of marijuana. So I think when you're looking at where to put retail establishments and you're potentially impacting folks, with psychoactive compounds that could impact their judgment or their driving, I think you want to look at that. And I would also take a fresh look at, let's opt out for a few months or a year, so we can study this and understand what's happening with the rest of the state. Thanks.
Thank you, David. David and Jamie, would you mind just lowering your hands just to keep the screen neat? Again, anyone else want to, Udi? Is that that was your real hand, not your
yeah, sorry for using
hand.
my non-digital hand. And by the way, my 7-month-old is right under me right now, so you may hear some shrieking, but
I'm glad
wasn't watching the screen.
to absorb the Zoom bombing, so
wasn't watching the screen. Look, I mean, I appreciate the concerns raised by David, but I also very much align with what Kimberly Levitt said in the chat box. Sorry, that's him just being excited. That this is not, the question before us is now whether to legalize marijuana or not. Marijuana has been legalized. Princeton residents overwhelmingly supported it. It has always been accessible to young people in Princeton. There is now a market where it will be accessible. The question is, do we want to kind of go in with this with the blind eyes, or do we want to be able to control how it looks like in Princeton, and be able to provide our value, use this as a way to express our values and our vision for what responsible consumption could look like. And also, and I think this part is very important, how do we use legalization as a way to repair a lot of the harm that had been caused by a war on drugs and a war on marijuana that was especially brutal in Princeton? I mean, when you look at the data, Princeton has a long history of extreme racial disparities in who got arrested for marijuana usage, even though we would agree that marijuana usage was prevalent in Princeton for a long time. But there was a lot of inequity in enforcement practices. So this is our way as Princeton residents to show what responsible consumption could look like, what responsible legalization could look like. But this is certainly not our decision about whether it's legal or not, because that ship has passed. It is legal, it is here, and that's not going away. Yesterday, Connecticut signed it into law. Rhode Island is about to sign it into law. Pennsylvania is around the corner. This is happening, and I support that. But even if for folks who have resisted it, the question now should become, how do you do it in a responsible way? And I think just trying to pretend that it's not here is not the responsible way to do it, but rather try to, let's regulate it in a way that aligns with our values. And I'll mute now to let my son say his share.
thank you, Udi, and accompaniment. Anyone else want to weigh in, task force member or otherwise?
Eve, I just, and you may have already mentioned it, but we need to reinforce that whatever recommendations are made, especially given the very tight deadlines, if the decision is made to opt out because we're not ready with our recommendations of what opting in would look like, that does not mean that we can still continue working on that policy to opt in once we're ready.
Thank you for that clarification, Leticia. Michelle, any?
I just was going to ask if anyone had any comments in terms of, the zones and the accessibility issues, the operational criteria. If feedback on those areas too, just to kind of inform the task force and the decisions towards that piece.
One quick suggestion to the council and to the folks listening: why don't we survey the town and see if they want retail, and put it directly to them that way? It's a little different than should we legalize, should we decriminalize? Those are all very important things that happened, but in the voting referendum, it did not include, do I want retail? How much retail do I want? We could really learn a lot and have a bigger dialogue with the town about it, rather than rushing to opt in where we're locked in for 5 years and we can't dial it back if we choose to. So that would be my suggestion, and I'll go back on mute here.
Thanks for that suggestion, David. And Bernadette, you've been waiting patiently. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I live in Palmer Square, and there's about 7 or 8 bars just around my house alone. And I don't see children. There are plenty of children and young people walking around Princeton, and I don't see any of the children being allowed into bars or buying alcohol. I think it would be the same thing with cannabis. It's going to be a legal system, and I don't think it's going to have any impact whatsoever on children, because again, you're going to need a license. I mean, we're going to make it legal and everything else. All those 7 bars, children are not walking in and buying alcohol, or they're not being served, and they're walking around Princeton all over the place. And these bars are open till 2 a.m. Now that we're back in business. So it's a legal business we're trying to establish, and I really don't think equating it to children and dogs picking on the floor, I'm not sure that has any relevance at all. Just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. Anybody have any comments to address the points that Michelle raised about, particular zones, particular hours, any of that? Should we opt in? All right, so barring that, unless anyone has any last words, I'll ask Michelle and Leticia particularly. Jeff?
I think, Colleen had her hand up too, and Jeff.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. So let me go to Jeff and then Colleen. Thank you.
Yeah, so just thank you for the discussion. I just wanted to say that I do disagree perhaps a little bit. I believe that this will have a big impact on our kids, and I do worry a lot about it. One reason is if you look at alcohol, there's so many laws, you can't buy it under 21, but the alcohol consumption amongst underage kids is through the roof. And unfortunately, I have personal experience with my own kids attending parties at Princeton High School kids, and even I've seen parents unfortunately providing alcohol to kids. They think it's safe for something in the house, but I truly believe that that it's. I wish we could protect our kids more, but I do worry that, of course, with legalization, I know that's not the issue here. It's already legalized, but I think that's going to be more and more of an issue as the years go by. That if we see the rates of drug use going up, like as alcohol usage is amongst our underage kids, et cetera, it's very concerning to me, and I think probably to most of us. And in terms of opting in, opting out, I also feel that opting in does actually hurt in certain ways. And I think it accentuates the negative impacts of legalization in terms of providing greater, availability, greater, greater publicity, greater visibility, et cetera. And I honestly feel that it will accentuate drug use as a result. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Jeff, for those comments. Colleen?
So I have a few unrelated comments, and the decision to either opt in or opt out has been discussed among the task force, because part of the tricky part of this is that legislation is still coming down from the state. But there has been concern that if we opt out now, that because of bureaucratic delays or not knowing how many licenses will be awarded and when, that we might have a hard time opting in after opting out. And I think, as Eve pointed out, that's to be determined. And operating on the assumption that almost 80% of Bristolians have, opted to legalize it, it seems that representing the best interests of most of us probably would not be to opt out with the problem of perhaps opting in later. And someone pointed out there hasn't been another medical license issued since 2019 in the state because of bureaucratic delays. And of course, COVID was in the mix, but so that was one of our concerns about not opting in. And then another thing I wanted to mention is a whole part of our population that we haven't even mentioned, which is seniors in our town. Seniors are using marijuana, and it's mostly, I think, for, mental health purposes or to help with the aches and pains of aging. And I think another important thing of our education, I'm on the education committee, but I would like to educate our seniors on the safe use of marijuana, because it is being used and it's being purchased illegally. And so some of these folks could get a medical prescription, and then they would have targeted product to meet their needs without using unsafely. So I think there was one other point I wanted to make in it, but it's passed me by at the moment. So I think that's it for now.
Thank you, Colleen. Leticia?
Yes, so I just wanted to again say that the purpose of this meeting is to hear from the public. We welcome and solicit your input, and we will continue doing that, whether the recommendation from the task force is to opt in or opt out, and if opting in, what it's going to look like. But either one, when this comes before council for consideration, first it's introduced, and then at another council meeting, there's a public hearing where we again hear from the public. Something that Eve already mentioned, I believe, and there's different types of licenses, 6 different types. One, that even if we were to opt out, delivery is something that a neighboring community can have a dispensary and be offering deliveries. So it's something that we're not going to prevent. We can't prohibit. Is that any resident in Princeton will be able to go online and order cannabis from the privacy of their home. So it's something that is not going to be, it's not something that is going to be controlled by the local municipalities. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. Again, anyone else, any final words? Michelle, do you have, Sharon? Is there?
So the only question, and you did address it, Eve, in the chat, but there wasn't any discussion, which I just wanted to, because I know that the person that posted it is still on, and she just asked about micro licenses and strict guidelines. So didn't know if you wanted to address that.
What was the question exactly?
Two parts. Are we still only considering dispensaries in Princeton? And what about cultivation micro licenses, which have very strict guidelines, all micro licenses?
Okay, so I could say that we have not thought, I'll speak for myself, to the best of my recollection, we have not talked about micro licenses for anything other than retail. The consensus from our planner who was on the call, I don't know if he's still here, Michael Laplace, and our zoning officer, is that Princeton, that retail, that cultivation, for example, didn't really seem to make sense here. And I would have to defer to someone who has more experience with cultivation, but I have not heard of a micro license for cultivation. That just could be my ignorance, and I apologize for that, because my understanding is that cultivation facilities need to be pretty large in order to be cost effective, and they're indoors, and they're usually in this state in former warehouses and things like that. So does anyone, and either my council colleagues or anyone on the task force, have any further response to that question? Because that's about all I know. Michelle?
Well, I think at the task force too, I think the task force had debated what to look for, what to look at first, which license, and the consensus was to look at the retail opt-in possibility and to opt out of the others, but not to say we wouldn't go back and look at cultivation, manufacturing, and other things. And I know that at first we discussed whether or not, because our land value and land, is so expensive in Princeton, that it might be a downside to cultivation. But since cultivation is an indoor situation, that could possibly be a licensing, and there could be areas that could be defined. But we had just decided to put that opt out now on those other licenses, and only focus on whether or not to opt into retail right now. So I think that summarizes where the task force was.
Valeria, could I thank you, Michelle? Could I don't know if you feel like you'd like to, Valeria's grew up here in Princeton and is a member of the task force, as represents not in our town, and is now a student at Princeton University. So has a deep, more than any of us, I think, has a deep well of experience of what it's like to be a teen here in Princeton. Would you care to share some of what you've been sharing in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, yeah, growing up here, I can say for certain, and also going to school here as a college student, it's very easy for your kids to already have access to cannabis, and what they have access to isn't safe because you don't know where it's coming from. It's probably being sold to them by someone their own age who doesn't know where they're getting it from. So, I mean, these dispensaries aren't going to be selling to children. They're selling to adults. They're selling to people who are 21 and over. And by having cannabis dispensaries, it's like having a liquor store. We're not marketing it to kids, right? Like that would be completely wrong because it's not for them. It's very clear that this is for a specific age demographic. And so we're not putting kids in any more danger than they already are because they already have access to cannabis. Probably dangerous cannabis because it's not regulated, right? But this, just by having retail in Princeton, it doesn't mean that they're going to have easier access to any sort of cannabis products. And yeah, I mean, that just from my experience, like that's how it is. I still have a sister in the high school, so I still like have hear and talk to students who are younger. And obviously I'm not saying like certain people are getting weed, certain people aren't, but they have access to it if they want it. So, I mean, having retail isn't going to change that fact.
I think one of the ideas of legalizing cannabis was to drive out the black market, and I think that has been more successful in some states than others. What will happen in New Jersey is unclear at this point. Valeria, again, sorry.
Also, yeah. Sorry, just one more thing I wanted to add. By making it legal and also talking more about it in school and making it less taboo, you're teaching students, you can actually have a productive conversation about the impacts of consumption of cannabis, right? And whether it's for you, whether it's not for you, the potential side effects, the harms, the historic harms, right? Of like the war on drugs, specifically, the harms of that. That's an important conversation to have in this when we're talking about decriminalization and legalization and bringing it to Princeton. And by even making it legal, it's also just making it less taboo for younger students to be like, oh, that's something that I want to have access to because it's not legal, right? Now it is legal for people who are 21 and older. And by having these productive conversations and like actually not being scared of it, I think would even be less of a driver for students to want to have access to it because they're going to have access to it once they reach 21. So like, what's the point of trying when they're even younger?
Valeria, to your point, we've discussed this on the task force, and we recognize we recognize those points you made, and because of that, as Eve mentioned, there's subcommittees on the task force, and one of them is education and outreach. What the task force would recommend, what needs to be included in that education and outreach.
All right. Any final words?
Veronica did have her hand up. I don't know if she changed her mind.
Veronica, did you have a comment?
I actually didn't, but I'm very in favor of moving ahead, and I think people should listen to the voters who already vote for this, right, and for us to benefit. So obviously, I second all the comments that Valeria, made. Not because she's my daughter. Usually, we're never in the same meetings. But as a parent of two kids like her, right, and my other kid who is in high school, I also agree. As a parent and a resident of this community, I feel that it's safer for us as parents to just go ahead and and make sure that we know where it's coming from. That it's not from it's unsafe, right? And if they're gonna go to the other towns to get it, or to other places that we don't even know, it makes it really unsafe for everybody. So that's my only comment.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I cannot put my camera, I'm multitasking.
Fine. All right. Again, any final, I'll just say for myself, I really appreciate everyone coming tonight, members of the task force and subcommittees and members of the public. And, we are absolutely listening to everything that is said here. We'll certainly consider all comments as the task force continues to think about this and makes recommendation, and then council deliberates. And I do see you, so please go ahead. Just Karen, did I say that right? I think you're still muted.
There we go. I'm learning well. So thank you so much earlier for taking care of the inappropriate behaviors, and I apologize. You have to deal with that. We all have to see all the inappropriate pictures. I just want to take less than a minute here and just talk about how I understand the concerns of other members here on board, like who are worried about having kids the easy access to marijuana, and I just want to pinpoint that the kids already have the access to marijuana, which is unsafe. It's unregulated, it's unsafe, and no monitoring is done on that. And the other thing is, the retail stores themselves, they go through extreme precautions when they do enter somebody into the stores. There's there's a number of precautions they take to make sure that the retail marijuana is not sold with a fake ID, even with a fake ID. So they test the IDs, whether they're legit or not. So if they're not legit, they send them back. So people have no way of entering inside the retail store and have the access to it without providing a government ID who are 21 plus. So even with the fake ID, they cannot enter. So we do have, and I understand how Valeria pointed to point out, we are not making it as a taboo. We can have more productive conversations in school. And I understand the council or the state officials are responsible for directing the tax revenues, but I think whatever the tax revenue we generate from these sales, we can direct them towards more educational programs, towards the alcohol programs, or towards more people who are with the fast having disorders. We can provide more guidelines or some sort of a programs that can help them in the future. So I think overall, if we take it in a positive direction, we can make a positive impact. That's all from my end.
Thank you so much. I see Mimi's hand raised, I think. Mimi?
First of all, way to go for that intro. That got kooky, right? With those people coming in on the site. You handled it like pros. I felt like I was part of a professional thing. So, and that was kooky. Let's just say it was kooky. Anyway, I love the direction you're going with this. The only thing that I want to make sure everybody on the call knows is that 2% of the revenues for what we're looking at goes back to the town. And I'm actually really excited that's not what's motivating you to provide this, that it's really about other things. But if the town can get 2% revenues back to the local economy, that's going to help us all. So that's all I'm going to say. It looks like a great direction. The only thing I'd mention is that once you have these dispensaries, you got to worry about where they're going to use it. And so then you got to think about how you're going to adjudicate where can they smoke it.
Mm-hmm.
And is that on that sidewalk or is that on the university campus? There's a lot to it, right? So what I would say is if you're looking at expenses to make sure it's pleasurable for everybody and legal for everybody, that you think about that part too. And whomever you give the dispensary, that they are absolutely responsible. That's my only thing. Otherwise, you guys are killing it.
Thank you, Mimi.
I'm done. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi.
I see Jenny's hand raised again, but I'll just say in response to the idea of smoking on the street, our understanding from the health officer is that smoking of cannabis will fall under the same rules in town as smoking of cigarettes, so the same places you wouldn't be able to smoke. But of course, that raises a concern, and this is one of the social and racial equity issues that we'll have to deal with, is to make sure that those summonses or fines or whatever for people who are not following those regulations, that falls evenly on everyone, and that's something we'll be talking about. And our police department pays a lot of attention to this stuff and really strives to do a good job. They do racial bias training, implicit bias training, so I know they'll be a strong partner in working with us on this. So thanks for bringing that up. And Jenny, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, thanks. And I did just put this in the chat, but thanks to Mimi for bringing up the idea of the funds. Portugal legalized everything. And before they did that, they spent 2 years building the network of therapists, of counselors, of addiction experts, to ensure, because every time you do legalize something, there is a small percentage of people who start using it thinking that it's safe, and some of them will get addicted. And obviously we don't have that much control because the state has already legalized it, but I would just urge the consideration of programs like Preventure, which is an evidence-based program designed to target adolescents who are at risk of substance abuse. And there are going to be other programs like that the schools could implement, that Corner House could implement. And so just ensuring that those funds get thought of that way. I'm sure that there are numerous places they could go, but I would hope it would be directed there.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, not to make light of your comment, but there's no shortage of ideas about how we could spend the income should cannabis be allowed in town, and that is definitely mental health resources and support for Corner House and other institutions like that have definitely come up in conversation. Although we haven't been focused on that because we've been focused on the task immediately ahead of us. But thank you for that. Again, any other comments? Leticia?
So, no, if there are none, and there may be after I say this, just wanted to make a public service announcement that for anyone that's interested in the following the work of the task force or any of the work from other boards, commissions, and committees, I encourage you to go to the municipal website, sign up for the newsletters from mayor and council, and also through Access Princeton, that individuals can sign up for notifications, so you can receive a notification about upcoming meetings from any of our boards, commissions, and committees.
All righty, then I think I'm going to bring this meeting to a close. Thank you all for your patience in enduring the bombing. It really puzzles me that this is brings satisfaction to people and that's what they want to do with their time. But there are many things in this world I don't understand. So that's just one more. And just thank you again, task force members, members of the public who are here. And just to say, as I think Leticia said, this is not the end of a conversation. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We can share your comments, concerns with the task force. Task force, regardless of what decision is made for July 12th, has a lot of work ahead of it to address. And our meetings are, open to the public, and you can find the links on the website. So please join us. So thank you very much and good night.
Thanks, everyone.